This screencast is to support this lesson on the topic of saving money, and it also focuses on linking words, and there are some multi-word verbs on the topic of managing money as well. The materials come from English Unlimited Intermediate coursebook by David Rea, R-E-A, and Teresa Clementson, and it's published by Cambridge. The book introduces the idea of money with a short reading exercise. It's just a paragraph, and the task is to read the introduction to the newspaper article, which is what this is, and decide why Kath Kelly decided to live on £1 a day. So they read this and answer that question. So that won't take long. And then they can do 2A, how many ways of saving money can you think of? Make a list, and then have a brief discussion about their ideas and compare and contrast them. Now they look at Kath's advice for saving money in 2B, and here are her money saving tips, 1 to 6, and they have to match the tips to pictures A to F. So there are 6 tips, 6 pictures here. They match each idea to each picture. Get them to pair check and feedback, saying which pictures they matched the tips to. That should be pretty straightforward. And then number 2, were any of your ideas the same as Kath's? So any of the ways they came up earlier to save money, they can say whether they were the same as Kath's. Okay. And then here, which ideas do you think are practical? So which of Kath's tips do you think are practical, useful? Why? And do you do any of these things? Before they do anything related to this task, you may want to pre-teach some of the vocabulary. I would say if you were going to choose anything, it would be bush and free sample. Perhaps market researcher as well. So you would need to do that before you do exercise 2B. So now we're going to look at the language in the tips. And the focus is on the linking expressions. Get the students to look back at the 6 tips and try and identify the use, first of all, of these words in blue. You could use some checking questions, couldn't you? So how many different parts of the sentence are there? 2. And what do these words in blue do? You could make a gesture to show that they link 2 ideas together. Okay, so all the words in blue link ideas together in some way. Now the students should be familiar with if, when and after, but you will need to check understanding of some of them, particularly instead of, okay, in case and whenever, okay, which is very similar to when, but has a very slightly different meaning, doesn't it? At any time. So you need to check the meaning of these 3. And the teacher's book provides a little exercise they can do to just make sure that they understand the meaning of these 3. So they've got 3 sentences with gaps, and they need to put the correct one in each gap. So for example, I recycle containers, or I can. Which one would it be? It would be whenever I can. I read the news online, buying papers, instead of. And never hurry when you're shopping, you miss bargains, in case. Okay, so this needs some careful checking, these 3. Okay, so that's the meaning we're looking at. Okay, so they link ideas together, and then we need to check the meaning of each one to make sure that they're clear on that. And then they can look at the form. So here, 3a says, look at the highlighted linking expressions, which can be followed by subject plus verb, ing or noun, either A or B. So we've got the 6 linking expressions and they need to categorise them. So elicit a couple of examples. Okay. So for example, if can be followed by only by a subject and a verb. Can't be followed by ing. And instead of is B, isn't it? It can be followed by ing or a noun. Instead of making phone calls, or instead of a phone call. And either A or B might be after. So after making a cup of tea, or after you make a cup of tea. Okay, elicit a couple of examples and then allow them to work together and categorise the rest into the correct column. And then you can check that, and in the feedback to that, get them to give you some further examples just to make sure that they're really clear on the form. Then you can work on pronunciation. So do this at sentence level, because obviously they're linking expressions, so they make much more sense when they're put into their context and doing what they are designed to do, link ideas together in a sentence. So choose some of the sentences to drill. You can shorten them for drilling purposes, and only choose the ones that you think are useful. So I would say that number 4 is useful because of what happens to the of and instead of. So I might drill leave notes instead of making phone calls, because that makes it more manageable for the students to repeat. Instead of making phone calls, leave notes instead of making phone calls. What happens to the of? Get them to tell you, and it actually becomes weak, doesn't it? Instead of making. Pick fruit whenever you walk anywhere. Pick fruit whenever you walk anywhere. Never ignore a market researcher in case they have free samples. In case they have free samples. So think about the sentence stress, any weak sounds, any linking. Now they can do some practice. So there's 6 sentence starters, and they need to complete the advice with linking expressions and their own ideas. So obviously do an example. Number 1, cycle or hitchhike. So they need a linking expression and an idea. So see what they can come up with. Give them 2 minutes and see if they can come up with any ideas, and quick peer check together and get some feedback to see the kinds of things that they're going to make that sentence into. So for example, they could say cycle or hitchhike instead of driving your car. Once you're happy they've understood the task, let them do numbers 2 to 6. So they can either do this together in small groups, which would be quite fun and more interactive, or you can get them to write down some sentences on their own and peer check afterwards. Make sure at the setting up stage that they're clear that they need to use a different linking word each time if possible, or if they're writing more than one idea for each number sentence starter, that they make sure they use different linking words. Then you can get some feedback and use that stage to check any problems of meaning, formal pronunciation that come up. If you've got time after this activity, they can then write 3 more tips for saving money of their own. And if you've got even more time left, they can tell the class their 5 top tips, and they can choose the best as a class. Now they can move on to the reading activity, and they're going to read the rest of the article about Kath Kelly, the woman they read about at the beginning of the lesson. So here's the text, and before they read the text they need to just have a minute or so to read through the 3 questions, and then they read the text and answer the questions. Okay, so then they can peer check and get some feedback, making sure they see the answers. Once they've done that, they can move on to the second reading task, reading for detail, and answer the 6th question. So again, make sure they've got time to read the questions before they look at the text again, and tell them they're going to read it in more detail and write down the answers to these questions. Set a clear time limit, get them to peer check, and then get some feedback, making sure they can see the answers. As always with the reading text, before they do any reading task at all, look through the text and see if there's any vocabulary you need to pre-teach. Now they're going to make some sentences about Kath based on what they can remember about her. So without looking at the text initially, they need to match these parts of a sentence, 1 to 6, with the other half of the sentence, A to F. So for example, Kath Kelly survived on £1 a day for 12 months. So you might not want to give them this and get them to do this one as an example, ask them which one it would match with, and then allow them to do 2 to 6. They can do that in pairs, perhaps, or individually if you like, and get them to peer check afterwards. And then they can read their article again and just check their answers, or you can confirm whether they were right or wrong and show them where the information is in the reading text. Now you need to cover the rules of meaning, form and pronunciation for these multi-word verbs. So you need to check with concept checking questions that they understand what each of these means. So for example, Kath survived on £1 a day for 12 months. Did she live with that amount of money every day? Yes. Was it easy? Was it easy for her to live on £1 a day? No. She survived. Good. Etc. Okay. She gave up her mobile phone. Did she continue to use it? No. Did she stop using it completely? Yes. So try and think of some concept checking questions. Check the form. What are each of these followed by? In these instances, they're all followed by a noun. But of course, things like give up can also be followed by a verb plus ing. And then you want to drill the sentences, paying attention to any phonological features that they need, any weak sounds, any linking, sentence stress, etc. Now they can do a second controlled practice task where they have to choose one of the multi-word verbs and put it into the sentence. So get them to do an example, do the rest, and then make sure they've checked together either by working together or peer checking after an individual task, and get the answers, making sure that in feedback you check anything they're still unsure of. And then you can finish the lesson with question 6, ask and answer the questions together. Do you think you're good with money? So they can use these questions to just have a little bit of speaking practice and make sure that they use the multi-word verbs in their answers as well. So they're getting some nice practice, and they can then come back together and compare their ideas and their answers. You can finish with doing some post-fluency correction.